making into a full episode, but I decided against it just simply because I didn't want a full episode about this, but also because I don't know if I even have enough to say about it in the first place to make a full episode. But regardless, I'm talking about true crime. I think that the pure obsession with true crime just really needs to stop. I just think it's weird and unnecessary. I'm talking about pretty much everything regarding true crime, like the podcast, the YouTubers, the documentaries, series, pretty much all of it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I've never watched, say, a documentary or a TV show about a serial killer or something related to a murder mystery or anything like that. Like, as an example, in recent years, I did briefly follow the whole Gabby Petito situation, but I stopped following it shortly after it was really taking off because to me it just didn't feel right. Something just didn't sit right with me. The whole genre of true crime obviously isn't new, but I think it's really exploded in popularity because all the information that we could ever really need about any particular case or about any particular person is pretty much all at our fingertips on the internet. And the fact that everyone today seems to feel the need to be some kind of detective or sleuth, and for whatever reason just wants to get inside the minds of these people. A good example, and a very recent one at that, would be the Jeffrey Dahmer series on Netflix because it's pulled such huge numbers. I think it's also broken some kind of records, and it's just so crazy to me because, for one, why are we still telling the story? Like, I just know there's so many resources out there that are already telling this exact same story. And two, while he obviously isn't alive anymore, I don't think that giving these people a platform to stand on is exactly the best move. And it's honestly arguably what a lot of them want in the first place. I'm not entirely sure if this fits under the true crime category. I'm just kind of assuming it does. But Casey Anthony is another good example of this because she now has, I believe, a limited series or some kind of series. And I think that it's already out. I'm honestly not too sure, and I really don't even care to take the 3 seconds out of my life to verify that. But with all these different things coming out, I'm just constantly asking myself if anyone actually has any sympathy for the victims or the families of these victims. And is anyone even cognizant of the fact that making national headlines is a massive motivator for a lot of these types of people? Does literally anyone else find the colossal fascination of the most sick people to ever live extremely weird and creepy? Because I haven't seen a lot of people online with a similar opinion, and it just really doesn't make sense to me. I'm not necessarily saying that you're a terrible person if you're into this whole true crime wave, but I'm also not going to lie and say that I don't think it's weird and even mildly alarming in some cases. So for the main topic today, I want to talk about living with our past regrets, whether that be bad decisions that we made or opportunities that we didn't take, something we're embarrassed about, really anything along those lines. But before we do that, I want to talk about the notion of quote unquote making mistakes and why I don't really subscribe to that, why I don't really like that term, at least when used in specific contexts. In our daily life, like our normal day-to-day routine, the word mistake is a very common word and it's something that everyone does from time to time. Some people more than others, but that's beside the point. And when it comes to the usage of the word mistake, it more often than not refers to something that we did on accident. As an example, if I go to the store and I grab the wrong type of bread, I would say that I made a mistake. Or if I go to the checkout and I use the wrong card, I would say that I made a mistake because I inadvertently used the wrong card and it wasn't intentional. Now, before I go any further, I'm well aware that words can have multiple meanings, but just stay with me because I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So let's take another example, and let's say that you decide to steal from a store, but you get caught in the process. Now you have to defend yourself in court because you committed a crime, and you might have a variety of reasons as to why you stole from the store, but a common excuse that is often used to defend our bad choices is that we simply made a mistake. Now, going back to the part where I said words can have multiple meanings, Another definition of the word mistake is an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong. I think the word misguided is key here because if we're being technical, is it incorrect to say that making a deliberate choice, despite knowing what we're doing is wrong or unethical, could that be classified as a mistake? No, it's not technically incorrect to say that, but by saying that we quote unquote made a mistake, knowing full well that our actions were going to have negative consequences, to me, it just feels like a cop out, and it feels like you're trying to deflect any responsibility for your poor choices. Or a more common example of this, and something that happens a lot, is if somebody cheats on their partner and gets caught, the most common defense that a lot of people make is that they, again, quote unquote, made a mistake. But the way that I think about it, I would rather ask the question, did you actually make a mistake in the way that you're implying? Or did you just simply make a bad choice and don't want to own up to it? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure if I explained that very well. It makes a lot more sense in my head and when I write it out, but when I say it out loud for some reason, I'm not really sure if it translates, but I hope I explained it well enough so that it made sense. But basically all that is to say, I don't personally refer to anything that I've done in the past that I regret or that I'm ashamed or embarrassed of as a mistake because I want to take full accountability for my bad decisions. I have done a lot of things that I regret, and honestly more than I would probably ever admit to. Things that I wish I never did, things that I wish I never said, and the truth is, if I could go back and change it, I would. Every single one of them. A lot of people say that they wouldn't change a thing about the past because it, quote, made them who they are today. But I don't know if I can say the same for myself because sometimes I ask myself, or sometimes I question, do I even like who I am today? And what if we could have been something entirely different? How are we so sure that this is the best version of ourselves that exists or that could exist? I understand why people say that they wouldn't change anything about the past even if they could, but I just don't know if I personally align with that. To put it into perspective, there are a few key moments in the past, some I had control over and some that I didn't, that I feel contributed to the major downward spiral in my life that played a major role in my history with mental illness. But if I knew back then what I know now, I can say with a fair bit of confidence that I would go back in time in an instant to prevent all of it from happening, if given the opportunity. The thing about this is that, of course I can't say for certain that my life would be any better or worse off than it is today, which I think is another reason why people say that they wouldn't go back in time, even if they had the chance, because of that fear of the unknown. But at the same time, I feel like I can say that my mental health struggles wouldn't have been nearly as bad as they have been for the past decade or so. I wouldn't have ruined a lot of relationships with people, not necessarily romantic, but mostly friendships, family, other platonic relationships. I also wouldn't have this guilty conscience because of the poor choices that I've made. There's just a lot of aspects that I feel would inherently be more positive. And so I can't help but feel like maybe it would be better if I could change things. Despite my best efforts, sometimes I do get caught up in the what could have been. And I know that it's a really dangerous game to play, the whole what if game, because we can do that all day and sometimes it can be disruptive. And for me, some of the time it is disruptive. Thinking of the what if sometimes keeps me up at night. And it makes me wonder how everything could have been different, to the point where it can literally be debilitating. And I know that may sound dramatic, but this is just the process that my mind goes through sometimes. Though even having said this, I do want to clarify that it doesn't mean that I wish things were different than what they are today. And I don't mean to say that my life is terrible as it is now, or that I'm a horrible person. It's just that sometimes my mind runs 1,000 miles a minute, and I just get tangled up in the what if. Something else that I think about from time to time that I feel is related to this topic is the saying of live life with no regrets. I don't know about anyone else, but I feel like whoever said this has either never made a bad decision in their entire life, or they think that they never made a bad decision, and they just don't hold themselves accountable for anything. And I say this because I genuinely don't know if it's humanly possible to not have a single regret in your life. Like, you mean to tell me that you have never, at any point in your life, made a decision that you regret or are ashamed or embarrassed of, are remorseful or guilty of? Because I just don't believe that for a second. I think that even the worst people in the world, like a lot of the subjects of the true crime material that we talked about earlier, even they have regrets about something, whether it's related to what they did or not, even if it comes out of their mouth that they don't have any regrets. I just simply don't believe that. If anyone goes through life honestly believing that they've done no wrong, I take that as being not only having absolutely no accountability or perspective, but also just being straight up delusional. I don't actually know anybody that's like this, but I'm sure there are people who are like this that are out there somewhere who really take the whole no regrets thing at face value. So we've been talking about holding yourself accountable for your poor decisions and past quote unquote mistakes and being self-aware and all of that. But there does come a point in time where we have to eventually move on from that, which can be an uphill battle just by itself for a lot of people, including myself. Dwelling on the past is a really risky game that a lot of us still continue to play, even if we know that it isn't good for us. For me personally, I don't think that it's accepting the fact that I did something wrong in the first place that's the hardest for me, but rather the hardest part is actually forgiving myself and finding inner peace within myself. And maybe that'll change sometime in the future, but at this point, it's just a fate that I've mostly accepted. As far as asking for forgiveness from the people that you've done wrong, I've always been kind of back and forth on it, because if you are genuinely remorseful and you change your actions to reflect that, then that's one thing, but also at the same time, if you really cared about that person, then you wouldn't have intentionally tried to harm or sabotage them in any way, and that you aren't even entitled to their forgiveness in the first place, because that's ultimately for them to decide if they want to forgive you or not. And so I really think that it's a fine line that you have to come to the conclusion of yourself. But on the same end, I also try to think of it as motivation in a way to be a better person than I was yesterday, because honestly at the end of the day, it's really all I can do, and it's really all that any of us can do. Not dwelling on the past is a lot easier said than done, and it's something that I'm still learning and coping with to this day. But it's a common struggle that I think we can all overcome, not just with time, but also work on our end. As much as the phrase, be the change you wish to see in the world, is overused and kind of redundant at this point, I still think that there's some truth to it. And this is something that I try to remind myself of every day, and if I had a life motto, this would probably be it. I think it's also important to be the change that we wish to see in ourselves, and it might even be more important. So instead of waiting on everyone else to change, why don't we start with ourselves first? So that's about it for the topics for today, but before I end things off, I just wanted to apologize in advance if anything about this episode seems off, or if things are misplaced, or if my energy seems off, or anything like that. For whatever reason, I've been having some anxiety about recording. I'm not really sure why, but it's there, and I just wanted to be upfront and transparent about it, in case anyone noticed anything different. Some things might have been misplaced, or some things might not have made sense, and I almost decided to not even record or upload an episode this week, but I don't want to let myself down or anyone else that might be looking forward to listening, and so here we are today. But I still want to thank everyone for listening, especially if you made it this far. As always, it really does mean a lot to me. You can follow me on Twitter at HoldItInPod if you haven't already. Also, if you have any feedback, suggestions, or topics you want me to talk about, you can DM me on there, or you can send me an email. The email address is holditinpod@gmail.com. You can also follow the show wherever you're listening, or leave a rating or review if you want. But otherwise, I'll talk to you guys next week.